I'd like to begin with a scenario that will probably feel familiar to anyone who has spent time inside a veterinary hospital. It's a normal day in the clinic. The schedule's already running a little behind. Appointments are beginning to stack up. The phones are ringing steadily, and everyone is trying to find momentum before the morning gets away from them. In the middle of all that noise, someone notices that the schedule has changed. One doctor appears to have a lighter day. Another has been double booked. Technicians are being reassigned, and no one has said a single word about why any of it happened. Naturally, questions begin to surface. Who changed this? Why is it set up this way? What happened? At first, those questions seem harmless. People are simply trying to understand what's going on. But when no clear explanation is available, the conversation doesn't stop. It just moves to treatment, to the front desk, to the lab, and into the quiet side conversations that happen in every practice. And once that happens, something magical begins to occur. And by magical, I mean completely predictable. The unofficial group chats. Yeah, you know the one that knows everything, the one that definitely knows more than leadership thinks it knows. Because when leaders don't communicate openly, teams will create their own information network. And that network is built on half information, assumptions, and a little bit of imagination. If veterinary medicine ever stops being fulfilling, many of us are clearly qualified to launch successful true crime podcasts. What is happening in that clinic is not dramatic or unusual. It's simply a group of people doing exactly what human beings have always done when something shifts around them and no one explains the why. They investigate, they theorize, they fill the silence with the most plausible story available. And the reason that moment matters is this. The original reason for the change may have been completely reasonable. A doctor may have had a family emergency. An urgent surgery may have been added. Leadership may have been trying to support the team rather than burden it. Once no one shares the reason stops mattering. That is the leadership lesson at the center of this course. I have lived this from both sides. I have been the person standing in treatment wondering what in the world is happening, and I have also been the leader who made a decision that felt entirely logical in my own mind, only to feel frustrated when the team responded in ways I did not expect. That frustration has a particular quality to it, a mix of confusion and mild offense, because from where you're standing, you did the work. You thought through the problem. You made a reasonable call. And somehow, the team is reacting as though you did something wrong. It took me longer than I would like to admit to recognize that the issue was not always the decision itself. Often the issue is that I failed to bring people into the decision through context. That gap between what I meant and what the team experienced was entirely mine to close. Because if leaders do not tell the story behind a decision, teams are going to create one, and the version they create is rarely kinder than the truth. Throughout this course, we are going to explore why sharing the why matters so deeply, what happens psychologically when leaders fail to do it, and what it costs culture and performance over time, and how to communicate decisions in a way that builds trust rather than confusion. Because leadership is not only about making decisions, it's also about making decisions understandable. That moment in the break room, where theories are forming before anyone had confirmed a single fact, was not a sign of a difficult team or a fragile culture. It was a sign of a human team. People were doing exactly what people do when uncertainty arrives without explanation. They looked for meaning, and when the people in charge did not provide it, the team provided it themselves. That distinction changes how leaders respond. When confusion looks like a character flaw, leaders become frustrated. When it looks like a predictable human response to an information gap, leaders become curious. And curious leaders are far better positioned to solve the actual problem. Human beings are wired to seek meaning, especially when something changes unexpectedly. We are constantly scanning our environment for cues that help us determine whether things are stable, fair, and safe. When routines shift or decisions appear without explanation, the brain immediately begins asking, what happened? Why did it happen? Does this affect me? Can I trust what comes next? When clear answers are available, people tend to settle quickly. When they're absent, the mind fills in the gaps. This is one reason silence inside organizations is rarely neutral. Psychologists describe this through attribution theory. When we do not know why something happened, we create a reason. And those invented reasons tend to lean negative. People are more likely to assume favoritism than logistical necessity, hidden motives than ordinary constraints. Uncertainty feels threatening, and to the brain, it prefers a negative explanation over no explanation at all. This is where psychological safety becomes especially important. Psychological safety refers to an environment where people feel able to ask questions, raise concerns, and speak honestly without fear of punishment. Research has shown that psychologically safe teams communicate more effectively, surface problems earlier, and learn faster. One interesting finding: high-performing teams often report more errors than lower-performing ones, not because they make more mistakes, but because they are willing to speak up about the ones that exist. When psychological safety is weak, questions that should go directly to leadership go underground instead. The conversation still happens. It simply happens where it is least useful. Veterinary medicine adds another layer here because it's already a high emotional labor environment. Teams are balancing patient care and client emotions and medical urgency, staffing pressure, and compassion fatigue. Sometimes all of it before lunch. In that environment, unexplained decisions are not processed in a calm vacuum. They are processed inside an already taxed nervous system. That's why clarity can feel disproportionately relieving. When leaders share the why, they reduce uncertainty, restore predictability, and communicate that the team is respected enough to be informed. People want to feel that they are not simply being acted upon, that they understand what is happening around them, and that they are part of something coherent. When leaders explain decision, buy-in increases even when the change itself is inconvenient. People can tolerate inconvenience more easily than confusion. They can adapt to change more easily than secrecy. What feels easier in the moment, which is staying silent, often becomes harder over time. To make the cost of unexplained decisions concrete, consider what that pattern looks like inside a specific practice across 6 months. In the first few weeks, nothing looks dramatically wrong. Scheduling adjustment happens without explanation. An employee is no longer part of a team. A workflow is updated without context. Each moment is minor on its own, and the team absorbs it. They're professionals. But something small is happening with every unexplained decision. The team's interpretive framework is shifting. They begin expecting that changes will arrive without context. They develop a habit of reading between the lines rather than asking questions directly because the experience of asking and receiving no useful answer over time is more discouraging than not asking at all. By month 3, the culture has quietly changed. Not dramatically, not obviously, but the team that once gave leadership the benefit of the doubt now defaults to skepticism first. Not because they're cynical, but because skepticism has been the more accurate predictor of their experience. They have learned that decisions happen to them, and that understanding will come later, if it comes at all. By month 6, the practice is paying a price that shows up in ways easy to misattribute. Discretionary effort has declined, not because people stopped caring about patients, but because they stopped feeling invested in the organizational direction. Ideas are raised less often. Problems surface later than they should. The team is quieter, and leadership, relieved by the apparent absence of conflict, may interpret that quiet as alignment. It's not alignment, it's withdrawal. Trust rarely disappears through one dramatic moment. It erodes gradually through avoidable ambiguity. When people consistently learn about changes through observation rather than communication, over time, employees become less likely to assume positive intent and more likely to suspect hidden motives or purely financial reasoning. Once that shift occurs, even reasonable decisions become harder to implement because they are filtered through accumulated skepticism. This is why leaders are sometimes surprised by the intensity of reactions to what appear to be small issues. The team is often not reacting to today's decision, they're reacting to every decision that arrived before it without explanation. Another consequence is the rise of informal narratives. Every organization develops stories that help people explain how things really work. And those stories emerge most powerfully when official communication is weak. Employees may begin telling one another that leadership always favors certain people, that decisions are driven only by money, or that there is no point in asking the questions. Their power comes from repetition and emotional usefulness, and if leadership is not actively defining meaning through transparent communication, the culture will generate its own explanations. There is also a practical operational cost. People are far more consistent in carrying out decisions they understand than ones they merely hear. Without shared understanding, execution fragments. A new process is introduced in a meeting. Everyone appears agreeable, and within 2 weeks, several competing versions of that process are operating simultaneously. The issue is no longer employee resistance. Alignment was never fully created in the first place. The encouraging reality is that these consequences are highly preventable. What is usually required is much simpler than leaders assume. Timely communication, honest reasoning, and the discipline to provide context before confusion has had time to organize itself. Once leaders recognize the cost of unexplained decisions, the next question is practical. What does it actually mean to share the why? Many well-intentioned leaders misunderstand the concept before they ever attempt it. They hear share the why and assume it means lengthy explanations defending every decision or asking permission from the team. That misunderstanding causes many leaders to dismiss the practice before they even experience its value. The reality is that sharing the why is not about surrendering authority or inviting debate on every operational matter. It's about helping people understand the reasoning behind actions that affect their work. It is the difference between announcing a decision and making that decision understandable to the people expected to carry it out. That distinction matters because understanding and agreement are not the same thing. People can disagree with a decision and still respect it, support it, and implement it well, provided that they understand where it came from and what it is trying to accomplish. Most adults do not expect to love every policy or every change inside an organization. What they often want is to feel that decisions are thoughtful rather than arbitrary, purposeful rather than reactive, and connected to real priorities rather than hidden agendas. At its core, sharing the why includes 4 essential elements. Context, helping people understand what created the need for a decision. Alignment, connecting the action to the values or goals the organization cares about. Reasoning, enough logic to replace speculation with clarity, and acknowledgement of the human impact when a change creates inconvenience or extra effort. Notice what is absent from that list. It does not require leaders to reveal every private detail, seek unanimous approval, or turn every scheduling adjustment into a town hall. It just simply requires enough clarity that people are not left guessing. This matters especially in veterinary medicine, where time pressure can make communication feel optional. It's easy to believe there is no time to explain. Yet the time saved by skipping the explanation is often lost later to confusion, side conversations, and inconsistent execution. Preventive communication is almost always less expensive than corrective communication. There is also a leadership maturity component here. Insecure leadership often believes authority is strengthened by withholding explanation. Confident leadership understands that clarity increases credibility. Decisiveness and transparency are not opposites. Strong leaders can act firmly while still communicating thoughtfully. One of the most valuable mindset shifts for any leader is this: your job is not only to make decisions. Your job is also to make decisions make sense. Over time, leaders who consistently share the why build something deeper than compliance. They build trust, and that trust becomes an operational advantage. Most leaders do not fail in communication because they lack good intentions. They fail because leadership communication usually happens in motion. Decisions are made during busy days, or interruptions are constant, emotions are elevated, and there is rarely a perfect quiet moment to gather thoughts before speaking. In those conditions, even thoughtful leaders default to one of 2 habits: saying very little and assuming people will just figure it out, or communicating reactively, which is offering partial explanations that just feel rushed or defensive. That is why framework matters. A useful framework reduces the need to improvise under stress. It turns communication from something dependent on mood or circumstance into something more repeatable. The goal is not to sound scripted. The goal is to become consistently clear. One practical model is the CARE framework. C for context, A for alignment, R for reasoning, E for empathy. It's also worth saying plainly, using this model, it's going to feel a little awkward at first. That is what it feels like to do something deliberately that you previously did instinctively, or not at all. The first time you consciously walk through these 4 elements, it may feel overly structured, but that feeling fades. What replaces it is watching a conversation land differently, with less confusion, less resistance, and noticeably more cooperation. Context answers the most immediate question people have when something changes. What's happening? Before employees can process instructions, they need basic orientation. Something as simple as, I want to give everyone a quick heads up that today's schedule needed to be adjusted. Helps people locate themselves mentally before details are introduced. Alignment answers a deeper question. How does this connect to what matters? This is where leaders connect action to values. Things like patient care, teamwork, sustainability, client experience. A scheduling adjustment explained as intended to ensure patient coverage while supporting team workload lands very differently than an unexplained change. People adapt more readily when they can see the principle behind the inconvenience. Reasoning addresses what many employees are quietly asking. Why this decision instead of another one? A last-minute doctor absence required a schedule rebalance. Rising product waste made inventory changes necessary. Team members rarely need every data point. They need confidence that a thoughtful process occurred. Empathy recognizes that decisions are experienced emotionally, not only logically. Statements such as, I know this may create a more challenging day, or I appreciate everyone adjusting quickly, communicate respect. People are often more cooperative when they feel seen than when they feel managed. When combined, the difference is immediate. Instead of silence after a schedule change, the leader says, quick update for everyone. We had to adjust today's schedule because of an unexpected issue this morning. Our goal is to keep patient care moving smoothly while balancing the workload as fairly as possible. This was the best option available on short notice, and I know it may make the day feel different than everyone expected, and I appreciate everyone staying flexible. That message takes less than 30 seconds. Yet within those 30 seconds, the leader has reduced confusion, reinforced values, explained the logic, and acknowledged the team's experience. Effective communication is not always about saying more. Often, it is about saying the right things in the right order. Understanding care is one thing. Using it consistently under pressure is another. Here are the practical habits that make clarity repeatable. The first is providing context before content. Many managers lead with instructions because instructions feel efficient. But when people are asked to act before they understand the purpose, resistance often follows. Instead of saying, I need 2 technicians to move to the front, a leader might briefly explain that clients arrived unexpectedly and wait times are building. The request itself has not changed, but the emotional experience of receiving it has changed significantly. The second is acknowledge reality before setting expectations. On a short-staffed day, a leader could simply demand that everyone move faster. A more effective version acknowledges that the team is carrying a heavier load than expected and that the day will require strong teamwork. The expectation remains clear, but it is now paired with recognition. People respond differently when they feel leadership sees the reality that they are living in. The third is leading with purpose before policy. When introducing new systems or processes, starting with the rule often makes people focus on restriction. Starting with the problem the rule is meant to solve creates a very different response. For example, a new refill protocol delivered without context sounds like bureaucracy. The same protocol introduced by explaining that the current process is causing delays and missed requests, and that the new system is designed to create reliability, is received through an entirely different lens. Purpose changes perception. The fourth habit is communicating early rather than defensively. Many leaders wait until frustration appears before offering an explanation. By that point, assumptions may have already hardened. A short explanation at the beginning is almost always more effective than a long explanation after morale has declined. It also helps to develop consistent language patterns for high-pressure moments. Simple phrases that make clear communication easier when stress narrows attention. Things like, I want to give everyone quick context for what is happening. Here's the reasoning behind this decision. Or, if anything feels unclear, please ask rather than guess. Language like this signals transparency and steadiness, and teams learn to recognize and trust those signals over time. Tone deserves attention as well. People will remember how communication felt as much as what it contained. Calm, respectful delivery often does as much to stabilize a team as the content of the explanation. Strong communication does not require leaders to become performers. It requires slowing down just enough to lead the meaning of the moment rather than merely react to the pressure of it. People are always reading cues, trying to determine whether today's disruption is manageable, whether leadership is thinking clearly, and whether they are being respected. Clear communication answers those questions far faster than silence ever will. And when these ordinary moments are handled consistently, trust becomes cultural capital. Everything we have covered so far represents external behavior, and external behavior matters. But behavior changes most reliably when it is grounded in self-awareness, because self-awareness is what allows leaders to catch themselves in the moment rather than only reflecting on what went wrong afterward. Many communication problems inside organizations are not caused by bad intentions. They're caused by unexamined habits. Leaders often believe they are being clearer than they are, calmer than they are, more transparent than they are. This is not because they're dishonest. It's because leadership creates perspective gaps. Without reflection, leaders evaluate their own communication based on what they meant rather than on what others have experienced. Intent matters morally, but impact matters operationally. A leader may intend to be efficient while the team experiences abruptness. A leader may intend to avoid burdening others while the team experiences secrecy. A leader may intend to stay composed under pressure while the team experiences emotional distance. None of those gaps require malicious intent to create real consequences. I want to be honest about something here. There was a period in my own leadership where I genuinely believed I was a strong communicator. I was organized, thoughtful, made considered decisions. When frustration surfaced in the team, my first instinct was to wonder what was wrong with their response, not what was incomplete about my own communication. I was evaluating my leadership entirely on my intentions without asking whether any of that was visible to the people I was leading. The shift happened when someone I trusted gave me direct feedback. You think you're sharing your thinking, but what we experience is conclusions without context. That observation was more instructive than anything I had read about leadership. Several common blind spots tend to appear once leaders examine this pattern honestly. One is the assumption that clarity is automatic, that because something is clear in their own mind, it must be clear to everyone else. A manager has spent days thinking through staffing decisions, reviewing schedules, balancing budgets. By the time the decision is announced, it feels obvious to them. The team, however, is hearing it for the first time. What feels like the end of a thought process to the leader may feel like the beginning of confusion to everybody else. Another is underestimating how strongly emotional state influences the room. A short answer given sharply, a distracted response to a sincere question. That moment may last only seconds for the leader, but for the employee, it may shape how safe it feels to speak up for weeks. Comments and moods from the leaders carry more meaning than leaders themselves often realize. Self-awareness also includes understanding personal communication tendencies. Some leaders default to excessive detail. Others assume brevity equals strength. Some soften every message until clarity disappears. Others become so direct that empathy disappears. Growth often comes from learning which natural tendency is being overused and then deliberately moving toward balance. Leaders do not need to be perfect communicators to build trust. They need to be responsive communicators. Teams are often remarkably forgiving of mistakes when they see humility and effort. Some of the most trusted leaders are not those who never misstep. They are those who can say, "Man, I realized I handled that poorly," or "I should have given more context." Accountability from leadership often builds more trust than polished perfection ever could. Leadership is not only making decisions, it's making decisions understandable. Let's bring it all the way back to where we started, a schedule change. No explanation was given. Within a short period of time, an ordinary operational adjustment had become a source of confusion, speculation, and unnecessary tension. And the entire episode, the full arc from scheduling change to break room conspiracy, could have been interrupted at any point by a single 30-second conversation. That is both the humbling and hopeful reality of what this course has been about. In practical terms, this means continuing to ask better questions. Where might people need context right now? What assumptions could form if I stay silent? Have I communicated only the instruction, or have I also communicated the purpose? Am I frustrated with resistance when the real issue may be uncertainty? Where can 30 seconds of clarity prevent 30 minutes of confusion? The veterinary practices that thrive in the years ahead will not simply be the ones with strong medicine or efficient systems, though both matter greatly. They will be the practices where trust is strong, communication is steady, and people understand the reasoning behind the work they are asked to do. In those environments, teams adapt faster, solve problems earlier, and stay engaged longer. And at some point in the next week, probably sooner than you expect, something will shift, something will change, and people will look up from what they're doing and quietly begin to wonder what it means. That moment belongs to you, not to perform it, not to get perfectly right, just to meet with enough clarity that the story your team tells is the true one. That is what it means to lead people rather than simply manage them. And it's available to everyone.